Hi, well, good evening, all. I am Daniella Statia, the 2025 to 2027 Romare Bearden Graduate Museum Fellow here at the St. Louis Art Museum. Welcome to If It Wasn't for the Women, the Art of Resistance and Change, supported by the Mary Strauss Women in the Arts Endowment, as well as the Art Bridges Foundations for Access for All program. I am so excited for you all who have chosen to be here with us tonight to hear these wonderful artists talk about their work and careers. The art of resistance and change comes from the deep and powerful history of Black, Indigenous, and people of color using their art as a mode of activism and reflections of their harsh realities. I will highlight and interpret works from our collection that exemplify this theme from our collection for your understanding, curiosity, and to anchor this conversation with history. Following, we will hear from Layla Zoibi, Samaya Sudeth, and Tawny Chapman. Drawing influence from Nina Simone's quote, "It's an artist's duty to reflect the times," the following pieces in our collection and from these three artists address difficult histories, stereotypes, and/or realities through various mediums of art. I chose these works and artists as they urge us to resist false histories, disgusting stereotypes, and encourage us to change our perspective and question social norms. As I, like many others, continue to navigate a complex and difficult reality, I begin to think about what I can do as an art historian, as a museum employee, and as a Black woman. This is one of the many things that I do. Organize and uplift voices that do the same, uplifting their community. Art is a valued contribution to any social change. It is important for all of us to continue to look towards art that inspires us to resist and change. I begin with Elizabeth Catlett. Well loved by me and others, Catlett became known for her sculptures and prints on motherhood, Blackness, and social justice. Catlett began her artistic career in sculpture before combining this talent with a curiosity for printmaking. Following this interest, Catlett became a guest artist with the Taller de Gráfica Popular, the People's Graphic Workshop, in Mexico City. Liking and thriving in this environment, Catlett stayed and eventually became a Mexican citizen as she was politically exiled and forced to give up her U.S. citizenship. Catlett, though living in Mexico for the majority of her life, continuously engaged in topics of Blackness in the United States. In Catlett's Sharecropper, the artist displays her interest in African masks as a woman looks off towards the side, showing the viewer her sharp cheekbones, elongated nose, low brow bones, and plump lips. But the woman holds a strong yet tired look as her lips are firmly closed and her eyes slightly squint and seem to look at nothing. This strong but tired woman represents the broader subject of sharecropping, a legal arrangement in which a landowner allows a tenant to use the land in return for a share of the crops produced on that land, an act that Catlett saw as part of a vicious cycle of poverty in the African American community. Sharecropper subtly addresses Catlett's qualms with an aspect of society in the 1950s, urging others to question sharecropping as an ethical work. Catlett believed that she was giving a voice to people who felt like they had none. Moving to more contemporary work, Betty Saar focused her assemblage works on African American identity, spirituality, and the connections between different cultures. Known widely for the liberation of Aunt Jemima and continued interest in culture, politics, and more for over 6 decades, Saar urged the audience to look closely and think about our history. The fragility of smiles of strangers lost at sea is no different. Saar reproduces this early imagery of a disturbing and inhumane transport of enslaved Africans in a European slave ship. The image displays enslaved people smushed and stacked onto each other to maximize the amount of people in each ship in their transport to the Americas. Saar is intentional with every aspect of her work as she carefully picked out the paper, a handmade Japanese paper, where the color and fibers resemble the movement of water. The fragility of smiles of strangers lost at sea refers to the nameless people that passed during this extensive, unbearable, and unwanted transport. Specifically, the fragility of smiles perhaps refers to the complex feelings of the enslaved and their position at this time. Starr continues to use this graphic of the enslaved quarters in her works such as Gliding into the Midnight from 2019 and Dark Voyage from 2024. Kara Walker's recognizable silhouettes persist in this print, Exodus of the Confederates from Atlanta, from her Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War portfolio. Through her silhouettes, Walker investigates concepts of race, gender, sexuality, and violence. In this lithograph, Walker lays a profile silhouette of a girl characterized with loose curly hair tied in a low ponytail on top of Harper's illustration. Inside of this black silhouette, Walker cuts out a second profile of an African-American male silhouette. In this cutout, the viewer can see a sliver of the original illustration underneath. Walker chose to frame an African-American man pulling a wagon as Confederates depart from Atlanta after Sherman's siege of the city. In the midst of the chaos, Walker consciously points out the presence of African-American people in this chaos and what this chaos meant to them. Quoting Garth Grennan's gallery, known for her poetic, curious, and profound interpretation of America's particular form of bigotry towards Native peoples, John Quick to see Smith's sharp humor pierces through the heavy topics of race, colonialism, pollution, genocide, and survival. Combining appropriate imagery from commercial slogans and signage, art history, and personal narratives, she forged an intimate visual language to convey her insistent social political commentary with astounding power. Though keeping some of the Western and modern-day state names, Smith highlighted state names that stem from native languages and state name mapped Cahokia. Smith emphasizes this country as indigenous land and their natural connection with the repetition of bison and wolves, perhaps suggesting movement, migration, or just the indigenous knowledge of the land and its animals as they vary from region to region. Smith also depicts in blue all of the extensive river routes. In Trade Canoe Cahokia, Smith shows the beginning structures of a canoe as a viewer can see through this canoe. Inside, the canoe holds what are goods, cast resin objects such as mirrors, guns, liquor, a beaver, and more. These paired works, state name maps, Cahokia and Trade Canoe Cahokia, show reality as a glimpse of what the U.S. once was, indigenous land with different native languages, river routes, wildlife, and much more, and how destruction was caused by colonialism and European ideals that they viewed as goods. I show you these 4 examples of BIPOC artists and how differently their work invited others to think about history and reality differently. Each artist addressed different issues, one about sharecropping, the other about heinous act of slavery and histories we lost due to it, the blurry history of African Americans and indigenous rights and histories destroyed by European conquest. They all found ways to speak through their art on challenges and violence that affected their communities and so many others. I invited Layla Zoibi, Samaya Sudeth, and Tani Chapman as through my eyes, they take on difficult histories and realities and rewrite them to empower us and push us forward as a community. And with that, I would allow me to introduce Layla Zoibi. Layla Zoibi is an interdisciplinary artist and educator of a Palestinian and Uzbek heritage from St. Louis metropolitan area and Southern Illinois region. They earned an MFA from Cornell University and a BA from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Influenced by spatial living environments of their youth and art history, they make experimental displays using building materials found in suburban design houses as an act of resisting homogeny. Visual explorations that inform their multicultural and spiritual experience in their work include aerial layouts, bodily presence, communal gathering, and cultural resistance subjects. All right, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I would like to greet everyone Eid Mubarak and Nowruz Mubarak. This is a very rare, like it comes, like, it's a very rare time for these holidays to coincide together. But it's just unfortunate that we are living in very ghastly, dark days, and just carrying a heavy heart to, have this happen, unfortunately. But with that, I'm gonna begin with first art piece that actually, this was the first artwork that I started during my graduate school time, also as a way to briefly introduce myself. So my name is Layla Zarbi. I grew up across the river, so metropolitan St. Louis area, and throughout all of my life, I grew up surrounded by suburbia. And for the most part, like suburban environments never really were captivating, not up until I entered graduate school in the fall of 2020. And if you know, fall of 2020, that was the trenches of the pandemic. And that forced me to allow me to be outside, exploring my surroundings within old suburban design homes that I was living around that had a little more flair and character. And so I began, actually, let me introduce the title of this work. The title of this work is just entitled Vinyl Attire Self-Portrait. This is where I began taking interest in the materials that are used in suburban design homes. I'm using OSB, which that stands for Oriented Strand Board, and vinyl siding, which led to this idea of recreating a self-portrait from my youth, wearing traditional cultural attire. And then during my time my first semester, I did produce more of these self-portraits, recreating self-portraits that were reference from or sourced from my youth. But then after I created a few of these, this is where I kind of felt I hit a wall and maybe was kind of limited to how I wanted to expand. And so this is then where I abandoned these materials and wanted to work with other ideas. And then I have another work titled They Cannot Represent Themselves, They Must Be Represented. So the name of the work, and it's a sculptural installation. The title itself is actually a quote from Karl Marx, and it was found before the first chapter of Edward Said's Orientalism. And for those that are not familiar with the book Orientalism, it goes into depth of the representational inaccuracies and out the East that's targeting Arab countries. And for those that are Marxists in this audience, it's not about Marxism. Sorry to break it to you, but when I had created this work, I felt it appropriate from what I was working with and thinking about the notion of a monolith, American Western identity, and its relationship to place, and the geographical comparisons with shared and repeated historic events of specific places. So there are a number of visual references seen throughout the work. First, I want to acknowledge the very large obelisk, and this large obelisk is a reference. There's an actual obelisk that is still installed in Central Park in New York, and it was actually supposedly gifted from Egypt to the U.S., and it was transported in the around the 1870s. And you'll also find these materials, mostly paper literary materials, they're actually part of within a time capsule that is actually currently buried underneath this obelisk today in Central Park. And so I'm actually including these items, only the select items within this installation, and that includes a Bible, which is actually shown on top of the obelisk here. There's also the writings of Shakespeare, and there's also a Merriam-Webster dictionary. And then not included that was in this time capsule was also an 1870 census and a copy of the Declaration of Independence. And then there are smaller obelisks shown here. And they represent the cities of southern Illinois, named after West Asian and African cities and countries, with southern Illinois bearing its nickname, Little Egypt. So the land of southern Illinois had resembled similarities of historical events, geography, and even climate that Egypt possessed. And then there's also rope that is kind of flowing through the sculptural installation, and they represent the Mississippi, the Ohio, and the Nile rivers connecting as one, gathering the global and local histories together. And I have another series titled Debka Watch. So this is a ceramic. These are ceramic works that were continued themes of communal gathering, featuring the display of repetitive house and prayer rug patterns. Here I'm reflecting the joy of Arab, specifically Palestinian culture, and the paranoia stemming from surveillance culture. The floating camera brackets referencing surveillance tools, and visualizing communal movement, specifically through Debka, a type of line dancing that's still passed down by generations and practiced today that consists of a variety of leg kicks and foot stomping. And then the time that I made this, I made these in the fall of 2021. I was also, during the pandemic, was teaching myself how to Debka. So that's where the influence kind of came in. And then I have an entire show. It's actually, it was my thesis exhibition called Out of Carpet Experience. So Out of Carpet Experience includes painting, sculpture, and screen print that are fused together along with carpet installations, interpreting the release of Anatolian carpets from the Ottoman era after which were featured as decorative props within Renaissance paintings, and the rugs are named after specific Renaissance painters. I wanted each image of the carpet to display transformation, individual appearance of color, scale, and shape of patterns. And some of the Renaissance artists that I'm going to name, they include Lotto, Bellini, and Holbein. These are their last names. And actually, I really wanted to share this work because I actually sourced all these rugs. You can find all the names of these rugs within the St. Louis Art Museum collection. And then I have another series titled Resistance Spoons. This started right after I graduated from grad school. So Resistance Spoons, this was born during my residency at Oxbow in 2022. There was no intention, like at the time that I was in where I was going with these spoons. I was just making them for fun, and these spoons are like, I was trying to recreate these wooden spoons that are from Uzbekistan. They're supposed to be both functional and performative as an instrumental tool. And while I was sculpting my first spoon, I noticed the top part of the spoon resembled a fist, and immediately thought of the resistance fist symbol, along with the 2021 event of 6 Palestinians escaping their jail cells by digging themselves with spoons, only spoons, which became a newly celebrated symbol of freedom. And the combination of both my backgrounds within the work kind of take form as a form of joy, a joy as resistance. And then it wasn't until a year later that it made the most sense for me to display them in the ground or in a pot of soil. And I have another work called Beauty Resistance. So this work mainly came from observing new norms of showing solidarity, of wearing the kufiya almost anywhere, and especially finding joy in Palestinians and Arabs and North Africans of the diaspora who were wearing the kufiya in reclaiming their existence and resistance after October 7th. So the very main influence for this work actually came from while I was traveling to Uzbekistan. I was having a flight delay. I was observing a young boy who had his green kufiya, and he covered it over part of his body like a blanket, and while he was laying down on a lounge chair in the airport. And in that moment, it felt like a breath of fresh air to just witness the scene. As at the time, and even still today, I constantly consume the news of what's happening in Gaza, of unalived individuals wrapped in white cloth. And I saw this as like a rest as a form of resistance, as well as like the virtuous rest while the wicked do not. And so lounge chairs associated with leisure activity, exclusively viewed as like a luxury at times, and I want to challenge the leisure as necessary, a liberation tool to the collective livelihood. And then I'm going to conclude to my last piece. It's called Rage Bait. I'm going to look at the title here. So Rage Bait. So that might be a word we all might know when we're like clicking on, maybe videos with very much attention getter headlines. But in Arabic, the word bait means house. And so I kind of wanted to it was a play of words, using Arabic and English together. And so this is where I find myself returning to the building materials that were once limited to me. I took mundane walks as of recent around my neighborhood and hyper observing my surroundings, which stimulated ideas and understanding perspectives in both conservative and progressive folks that openly express their views about the U.S. and the direction that it's going. And specifically when it comes to like displaying that expression from their own house. So I was also influenced by the work of Jasper John's Three Flags painting. I really love the pop art era. Both of these, they led me to create, this is one of three vinyl siding versions of the distress flag of the U.S. I altered the vinyl siding by cutting it up to look either fringed or in literal flames, and the sea of blue is drilled with holes that are interpreted as bullets that targeted the murder of 6-year-old Hind Rajab during the first 6 months of the genocide in Gaza, and thinking about grief and how the society doesn't allow space for grief. And then I also, I forgot to mention, for this work, thinking about the distress flag, I also flipped the vinyl siding because normally the vinyl siding is the way it's like built. It should be the other way around. So I wanted to also kind of play into that distress of turning it upside down and thinking about rage in that way. Thank you so much.
Hi. Can you guys hear me? Yay, okay. All right, so I'm going to introduce our next artist. So Samaya Sadith is a mother and a transdisciplinary artist based in St. Louis. Their practice spans murals, digital illustration, sound performance, and socially engaged public work, centering healing, ecology, and collective liberation. Drawing from ancestral knowledge, hip-hop, ritual, and cultural community collaboration, Samaya creates work grounded in care, resistance, and kinship with people and their land. Their projects often activate shared space, inviting participation and honor lived experiences as a source of knowledge and transformation, emphasizing public art as a tool for connection, storytelling, and collective art. Please welcome Samaya Sadith.
Speakers, please speak How's that? Is that good? Okay. All right, thank you all so much for being here, and I just feel so honored to be able to talk to you about my work. And so, again, my name is Samaya Sadid. This talk is called Real Talk, Cards for Liberation, in which I'll explore a larger body of work called the Confluence Tarot that I have been working on for the past 7 years, and the way in which that practice spans beyond what we know as tarot cards. I'm a mother, a St. Louis-based transdisciplinary artist and educator, and my practice brings together illustration, public art, installation, and ritual to explore healing, joy, and liberation. I'm especially interested in creating spaces, both physical and spiritual, where people can reflect, resist, and imagine. A lot of the work that you see in these images are public pieces that are around St. Louis, so maybe some of you have seen them, and it could be a good field trip to go on after this. My practice is rooted in care, intuition, and deep listening. It is relational and responsive. It shifts depending on people, place, and energy. I invite people to experience the work not just visually, but in the body, both somatically as well as spiritually. And a lot of this work comes together in this body of work called the Confluence Tarot. And so this deck, it's an ongoing body of work. It's grounded in the Mississippi River Valley and reimagines tarot as a tool for liberation and collective healing. The imagery is rooted in real people, places, and histories, while remixing traditional tarot archetypes. Each card weaves together ancestral knowledge, protest, ritual, and everyday life. So there's a lot of the archetypes and the naming conventions of that traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck are present here, but I love tarot, and as much as I love it, I never felt like I was seen. I couldn't see myself, and this was kind of a challenge for me to reimagine tarot in a way that felt inclusive to me. And research is a really big part of my practice. I think my practice is grounded in research, not only tarot research, but through archives, lived experiences as well. All of the imagery in my tarot cards or in my illustration, they're real people. They might be ancestral. It might draw from contemporary things, but everything that you see on any image that I produce is coming from a real source. I study symbolism, spiritual systems, and frameworks like Black feminist thought, somatics, and rest as an act of resistance. And these are just two examples of really recent tarot cards. These cards pull directly from contemporary events and lived realities. The Wheel of Fortune card that is on your right draws from protest movements like Ferguson, specifically the image of the police car on fire. I'm thinking about cycles of injustice, resistance, and uprising. The Tower, which would be on your left, reflects collapse and rupture, moments where systems or symbols of power break down in order for something new and necessary to emerge. My work is always in conversation and in response to what is happening around us and not separate from it. Maybe you all saw over the summer the card on the left, the Tower, the Nottoway Plantation, caught on fire this past summer, and there was actually a real sight of joy for people, and I was really inspired by that, and this was a card that I had a hard time coming up with an image for, and people who practice tarot or work with tarot, it's kind of a scary card, and it just came to me when the time was right. So a lot of my work moves beyond that intimate scale of the tarot card. My practice is transdisciplinary and it moves across scale, from the digital illustrations to the tiny cards, but my work also moves into the scale of murals, into public space and installation. I think that the shift in scale changes how the work is experienced. I'm interested in what happens when these archetypes leave the deck and move into the body in a human or larger than human scale, and into public space. The public aspect of my practice feels most important, and it's where I can impact change the most. Through murals and installation, these energies become something you can encounter, or maybe they encounter you, and it's not just an interpretation. I continuously work to expand this work into public places, like with this billboard. This was a temporary exhibition near the airport for maybe just a month or so during the height of the pandemic, when people were really kind of like stuck and feeling like we needed some sort of inspiration. So I was really honored to be able to have this opportunity. I think work at this scale and in the public changes who has access to the work, and how people experience work outside of traditional art spaces is really important to me. And so I'm going to move specifically into an exhibition that this work is in a gallery setting. And this was an exhibition, my thesis exhibition, called Real Talk, 5 Cards for Liberation, where I worked specifically with 5 tarot archetypes to create this work. So when people came into this space, there was a really dark black curtain that blacked out most of the room, and you had to like physically open the curtain to come into the space. I created an intimate, enclosed space where people could sit, reflect, and engage with the work more intimately. Participants stepped into darkness with plush black carpeting underneath. Lavender and floral scents were throughout the space, and there was a tarot-based audio playlist on a loop throughout the space. There's also a video component of me guiding a tarot reading experience within this space, in the style of a personal one-on-one YouTube reading where the viewer feels directly addressed, like this reading is just for them. And this is just a close-up of a participant in the space. So while you're in this dark space, the light that you really see is from the candles, this neon sign, and the YouTube video. And there's no audio coming from the video. The only audio you hear is this hip-hop based playlist that I'll have a link to at the end that you could scan, where I created a playlist of 78 songs that go in alignment with all 78 cards in the tarot, but through a hip-hop lens. And like I mentioned before, my work with tarot is really out of not feeling like I identified with things, even though there's a love for it. And this is a close-up of the altar that was in the space. I think that entire space of the exhibition works as an altar, bringing together ritual, memory, and offering. For me, this work is about creating spaces where people can feel, reflect, and imagine something different, where liberation is not just an idea, but something that we can begin to experience in everyday life. And so this altar work, I was pulling from a lot of spiritual traditions, and you typically offer water, vices like cigarettes and beer, herbs, candles, and living offerings like flowers. And so this was a space where you could sit as well. And throughout this exhibition, people were also leaving things. So someone left money, people were leaving candy. So it was a really interesting experience to have people feel connected to this altar space and feel inclined to give, even though that was not necessarily the intention of the work. And to close, this is a QR code for that playlist that I mentioned, so you can feel free to scan that. It's 78 songs. I think it's like 3.5 hours. So you can really rock for a long time or not. But it goes to a Spotify playlist, and feel free to scan that and check it out. And I'm so grateful for you all listening, and thank you so much.
All right, and our next artist is Tawny Chapman. Tawny Chapman is a self-taught artist based in Maryland. Through a layered process of photography, painting, and hand embellishment, she creates work that honors and celebrates beauty of Black childhood and the Black family, while at times confronting historical misrepresentations and erasure. She has recently expanded her practice to use pigments, paints, and mixed media to articulate her message, as well as creating deeper research-based work, assemblage, and film. In 2022, she was featured in the Afrofuturism Manifesto, Blackness Reimagined, a collateral exhibition of the Venice Biennale. Her work is held in both private and public collections. Please welcome Tawny Chapman.
I feel like it took me forever to get over here from my seat. Thank you, Daniella, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you everyone for being here with us tonight. This is my first time in Missouri, and it is absolutely beautiful, and it's an honor to be on this panel today. To reintroduce myself, my name is Tawny Chapman. I'm a photography-based artist, and that just means that photography is my first layer of communication. I have been working in the field of photography for over 25 years, and for the past 10 years, I have been approaching my practice through a multi-layered process to convey the messages that I'm looking to convey through my work. I use materials such as paper, denim, thread, gold-colored pigments and paints. For a while, I was using genuine gold to convey messages of preciousness and value. But in researching the beautiful and spiritual historical meanings behind gold, you also uncover the atrocities connected to gold as well. And so I stepped away from using genuine gold in my work, particularly to bring awareness to the atrocities happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where over 6 million people have died and been killed, fueled by unethical mining practices, violence, sexual violence. And so while the supplier I was getting my gold from was sourcing this gold from conflict-free zones, to me, it made more sense that I step away from its use so that I can take opportunities like these to speak about these atrocities and hope that others will look into them as well. And so now I use gold-colored pigments and threads to convey the similar message. And so a lot of people ask, have I always been an artist? And if you ask my mother, she'll tell you I've always been in the arts, a creative. I spent most of my childhood in dramatic arts. I was in my aunt's theater company and other theater programs in my area. I thought that I would be an actress. I also experimented with paper collage, making paper dolls and paper arts, and went to work with my mother. And I'm really dating and aging myself now by saying I went to work with her to play in Microsoft Paint to create digital art. And I also dabbled in photography, photographing family members and friends. And in high school, I received a small scholarship for dramatic arts. And when I had the opportunity and attended a conservatory for dramatic arts after high school, I probably attended for 5 months or so and just quit. And by the suggestion of my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, I turned to photography as a way to earn an income. And so prior to my father's diagnosis with prostate cancer in 2010, I had been shooting mostly commercial photography. And when my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer, he and I agreed that I would capture and document his battle with prostate cancer in hopes that it would encourage and be a survival story for other men to take prostate cancer seriously, specifically Black men who are hit by prostate cancer the hardest. But what I ended up capturing is prostate cancer taking my father's life. And after that, my life completely just started to change, and what I wanted to do with my life as well. And so I wanted to share a few images from that year that I spent documenting my father's battle. This is my mother, my daughter, and my father during one of his first appointments after his diagnosis. This is my mother and father after my father's spine surgery. And my sisters and I and my mother holding hands over my father in prayer while he was in the hospital. And so after losing my father, something in me felt like it died, but something also felt like it awakened. I started just paying more attention to everything that was going on in the world around me. I started to really pay attention to the world that I was raising my children in. I started, just like noticing when we would go to museums, we would spend what felt like forever before we came across stories and imagery of people that looked like ours or that we could relate to. I was constantly seeing news stories of Black children being sent home from school for wearing cornrows, Afro puffs, afros, extensions, being excluded from school activities for wearing hairstyles that we naturally wear in our communities and culture, being banned from schools and workplaces, and also stories of Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Sandra Bland. All of these things just started to just weigh on me, and I can remember at some point going into my basement, pulling out all of my old commercial work and just kind of painting over it, just wondering, like, what am I doing? What am I doing with myself and my life? And then another time I just remember just sitting down and just creating, and all of those things that I had done from childhood to adulthood just kind of collided together, and I just started to create and make work that I wanted to see and that I wanted my children to see. And so major themes that I pursue in my work are celebrating the beauty of Black childhood, celebrating the beauty and the truth of the Black family, addressing misrepresentation and erasure, celebrating Black hairstyles. And my process starts with portrait sittings of usually 90% of the time family members or someone that I'm really close to, my daughters, my son, my godchildren, nieces, nephews, and after printing and refining, the hand embellishing starts from there. And so in my earlier works, I photographed my sitters wearing white so that it would be easier to go back and embellish their garments and, work on the piece easier. And I wanted to share, I'll call this my golden phase, influenced by Gustav Klimt's golden phase. That's very intentional, that is on purpose. When I remember when I first saw Gustav Klimt's work, I remember being stopped in my tracks, especially from his golden phase, and feeling feelings of regality and magnificence and beauty. And those were the feelings that I was looking to evoke in the viewers of my work. And so the series, The Redemption, celebrates Black children and their preciousness, and also you'll see that their hair is also celebrated in this work as well. And in your hoodie or your white tee, this is a piece featuring my son, and it was my way of elevating the hoodie, in a way of asking the viewer to view the hoodie differently when Black boys and Black men wear it. It's usually stereotyped when it's on Black men and Black boys. So this was my way of asking the viewer to look at the hoodie differently. And then I began to work on a series titled Iconography that is influenced by Byzantine mosaics and religious iconography. And when I photographed those sitters, I photographed them wearing clothing, most of the time clothing that I designed so that I could, when I began to lay the tiles, that I could use those garments as guides to lay the tiles. You'll see here that I'm painting the background with different tones of gold. In researching religious iconography, the iconographer's hands were believed to be guided by the Spirit of the Most High. And the works were thought to be literal prayers themselves and conduits to the divine. And for me, I'm not asking the viewer to worship my sitters. I am asking them to view them as sacred, as special, as precious. And then I began to adopt this process where the background with each paint of stroke I made, I said a prayer, said an affirmation for my son, my daughters, my children, Black families, children in general, and the world. And I wanted to share the completed work from the previous process video titled A Hopeful Truth, and a newer work from Iconography, where you will see that the work from 2022 to 2023, 24 karat gold was used, and the newer works I have moved away from using 24 karat gold, and only gold colored pigments were used in this work. And so in addition to iconography, I began to work on two new bodies of works titled The Reconciliation and The Restoration. All recently were exhibited in my solo exhibition titled Sanctuaries of Truth, Dissolution of Lies at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, where I was given the opportunity to fill 3 galleries with my work. So I exhibited, I believe, 30 pieces, some from my golden works, and the other 2 galleries were filled with works from my series, The Reconciliation and The Restoration. And I feel it makes more sense for me to speak about the reconciliation, starting from this slide, as an experience that I had with my younger daughter in the grocery store while I was holding a watermelon kind of really pushed me to focus on continuing this work. The reconciliation, it really speaks about and honors foods and food traditions that have sustained Black families through generations. And it also tells stories of erasure and sabotage. And so while I was holding a watermelon in the grocery store, my daughter, she was 10 or 11 at the time, she said to me, "Mommy, that's racist." And I was really just taken aback. I started to look around and wonder if people were watching me hold this watermelon. But what really actually hurt me was that she was so young, and she had already inherited this idea from somewhere that there was something shameful about being Black and holding a watermelon. And so I realized at that time I actually had no idea where that stereotype came from. I knew that it existed, but I did not know why. And so in doing research and turning to books by scholars and food scholars and chefs that had already done the work to look into this, I found that the watermelon was actually the way that enslaved Black people gained financial independence after the emancipation. And that when their farms were successful, they would be burned down. And that this imagery mocking Black people eating watermelons were used as a way of sabotage, to sabotage the success and to deem Black people unworthy of citizenship. And so economic heritage, which is the title of this piece, is my way of placing the watermelon back to the place where it belongs in our history and in our stories. And for my series, The Restoration, for years I had been collecting racist objects that I found in thrift stores, antique stores, and at auctions. And it was just my way of removing them from the shelf anytime that I saw them. And this is not just something that I do, this is something that a lot of Black people do when they see these objects. And I gathered this big collection of these objects that I had no idea what to do with. And so I one day just thought, why don't I give them a new life? And so I started to work on removing them from that context by removing their exaggerated lips and bulging eyes, and with the help of my mother, creating new garments for them to wear and just recontextualize them in my own way. And I then photographed them in the laps of Black children in their new state, and also Black families. And so I thought that I was going to continue on and talk about the framing and the intentionality behind it, but I think I'm going to end with my presentation with a quote that has always stuck with me from the first time that I saw it, and it actually connects to the question that Daniella posed for this panel. Is it the artist's obligation or responsibility to engage with the present and the things that are happening around us and in the world? And that quote is, our children inherit what we don't resolve. And I will say that I feel the obligation goes beyond the artist, but to all of us, that when we see dehumanization taking place, when we see atrocities happening, that is all of our obligation and all of our responsibility to speak out about it, and to do whatever we can so that our children aren't inheriting the current world that we are living in. Thank you.
All right, I think it's time for our Q&A. So I think there should be a mic that will be floating around in the audience if I can see. So let us know if anyone has any questions. Awesome.
We have a question back here. Please hold the microphone close to your mouth.
Tani, could you just please explain the picture of your son with the ice cream cone? I think it has deeper meaning than thank you.
Oh, am I? Hello?
Yep.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay. Yes. This piece does have deeper meaning. It's titled "Truth Soft Served," and it's from the. Oh, that's incorrect. It's from the Reconciliation, not the Restoration. But the piece speaks about vanilla ice cream, and it is talking about the erasure that has occurred when it comes to vanilla ice cream. And the fact that James Hemings, who was Jefferson's enslaved chef, is actually who is responsible for the vanilla ice cream that we eat today. But Jefferson usually gets credit for that, as well as Augustus Jackson, who also was a previously enslaved chef, who is responsible for the soft serve ice cream and cultivating it, and who rarely, if ever, gets mentioned when it comes to being responsible for the vanilla ice cream that we eat today.
You just raise your hand and we will come to you with a mic. Ready? Gotcha.
So I work in public art, and the question that myself and my colleagues get a lot is, how do you navigate or pivot your work in response to current situations? And so my question to you all is, how in your personal individual practices have you had to pivot, or pause, and what does that look like individually for you working within a socially engaged practice?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to process the question, and can you ask it one more time?
In each of your individual practices, how do you pivot or pause in response to events that are particularly upsetting? As someone who works in public art, we've had to pivot a lot this year and pause and kind of recontextualize our work. And so I'm just curious what that looks like for you, like that pausing, that waiting. How do you navigate that?
I'm just trying to wonder if I ever pause.
I all the time. I mean, that's just all you do. You just pause. You pause. You have to. Projects don't happen. A lot of censorship. My little cards have been censored so often, and you just pray that there's another avenue, and it usually works, in another way. And I just always, hope that I can share my work publicly at the right time. It might not always be the time that I want, but I think I've just had to get used to people saying no or trying to find an alternative.
I think I approach it from just, I start with just grieving. I'm someone that I'm a very emotional person. And if I'm moved by something that's based on events, I think I just let it happen organically. I'm not someone that's like, oh, I need to make work and I'm gonna immediately, like, this thing happened and I'm gonna, like, do it. It just kind of just ebbs and flows, just depending on where I'm at in my own headspace.
Yeah, and that's why that's why I was kind of processing and wondering if I pause, because I don't know that I pause in my practice itself. I think that I just continue to do the work, and if something is, and I'm also a very emotional person, and I didn't realize until later that my work was actually a form of healing for me. And so I don't necessarily think that I'm pausing. I think that I am just creating to pour those emotions and those things into my work. So that's why I don't know that I do pause. But I do agree with censorship, especially in sharing. I will say I am grateful that for my exhibitions and exhibitions that I have coming up, no one has asked me to censor anything. But I will say that sharing on social media, when I'm sharing about what's happening to Palestine or what's happening to Congo or those things, I do feel censorship in there. And I don't pause, I just keep on going and keep on sharing anyway. So that's kind of why I was unsure how to answer.
Hi there. In regards to the tarot card collection, I know you're saying it's still a work in progress. When you do have it fully completed, do you plan on having the full deck available for purchase in the future?
Yeah, so this past year I worked on the booklet. So like all of the definitions and meanings of the cards, like in a kind of like liberated, queer, Black and Indigenous focused lens, like very focused on healing and like having more visibility to those stories. So the booklet's completed, and I'm looking for a publisher. Self-publishing would be great, but that's just kind of like a lot of work, and I don't want to be tired of it because it's probably like going into year 8 of me working on this.
Okay. And then my second question for the last artist who's a photographer, when it comes to your projects, do you find yourself focused on one project altogether, or do you kind of go in between, like pause and start in between your projects?
I think I do bounce in between projects, especially the works that I'm making are pretty large. And so also now I'm using a lot of embroidery. So after doing that for a while, it starts to hurt my fingers. So I'll go to now laying the tile work on my works from iconography. So I'm probably bouncing between 7 different works at the same time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations. I appreciate how all of your work is based in research, and my question is for Samaya. You said that all of the people you represent are real people. Did you find them on the local level? Are they all from St. Louis, from Missouri? And can you tell us more about your research in the archive and your process?
Yeah, like tarot itself is open source at this point because the original creators have passed, and it's been 100 years and so much after their death. So a lot of that's already open source. And that's kind of where I look at for imagery. My Justice card, which is also a mural on Jefferson in South St. Louis, that's actually maybe like a teenage girl, maybe 13, 14 years old. And that's like an open source archival image that I found. So I do a lot of online searching, books, library, where it might be an ancestor, like someone we don't know who this person is, but I'm just really drawn to the image, or the police car from the Wheel of Fortune card is an actual like photograph from a protest. For contemporary images, maybe I'm pulling from a farming advertisement for my death card. So it's just really all over the place. I don't necessarily put anyone I know in the images, but they are real people in real places.
I have a question for Layla.
Hi, Steve.
Could you say a little more about the European paintings and the way they've been used, the way you're using them?
The Renaissance paintings?
In rugs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like what is how does that Orientalist, and what's the significance?
Yeah, so when I had discovered these paintings that incorporated these Ottoman era rugs, they were just like mainly used for like props. Like they weren't like functional for them. Like it was just like a decorative prop. But at the time from what I learned, it was like with like trading, it was like this popular trend amongst the wealthy to purchase these rugs and own these rugs. And I think for me, it felt like they were kind of stripped away of their identity because they're not being used either as prayer rugs or just like they're just using it for their own like aesthetic. But then from what I also found, like the trend had stopped, or the popularity of like collecting these rugs stopped because of its association with Islam. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you all for being here tonight. It's wonderful. Tawny, welcome to St. Louis. We grew up with the St. Louis Cathedral, the Basilica in St. Louis, which has one of the largest installations of mosaics in the Western Hemisphere. That is what originally connected me to your work, the spirituality of it. So I thank you for that blessing, I really do. But considering the pivot and the stall, how do we further engage with your work, and how do we support your voice, if you wouldn't mind? And all three of you, thank you.
Could you repeat the question? I didn't realize you were asking all of us.
No, that's no problem, but certainly our guest to St. Louis, we certainly want to hear from her. But how do we all further engage with your work and support your voice?
I think that it's important to just continue to view our exhibitions. If you're able to collect our works, to speak our names in places that we might not be in, to follow our newsletters, follow us on social media. And really, I think that a lot of people don't realize, well, especially for me, I absolutely love hearing from people who my work resonates with. I love receiving those messages, and they mean a lot to me. So even just words are support enough for me when it comes to myself and my practice. It does sometimes, you can feel a little bit discouraged, or just like the world itself is just so stressful with everything that's going on in it. And sometimes just receiving really kind words about how your work has uplifted someone or taught them something that they didn't know is more than enough support as well.
Just like Tawny said, I think like speaking our names, definitely paying artists, paying women artists, paying Black and brown artists. If you're in a leadership position and you're choosing to commission someone, make sure that you're not commissioning the typical person who gets, the most play in the art world. I think that's where, most women, femmes, non-binary people are the ones who attend art school in the highest rates, but professional exhibitions typically go to white men, as well as commission opportunities. So my 2 kids are in the audience. That's how I feed my fam. So, it's really important to me to say commission artists, yeah.
I think I'm gonna maybe piggyback on everything that they said. But yeah, I guess basically it's just circulate, like maybe if you're on social media circulating their people's work, should give it like a different audience, because sometimes, you might only have certain works that are only for a specific audience, and I think it should be maybe shared from outside spaces and sources. I think also, like if you're not someone if you're not in the arts, but maybe you might know someone that's in these professional like settings. If you mention them or their art or their work and what kind of work they do, that could lead them to something for the artist. Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. In the effort to speak people's names when they're not here, I'd love to hear an artist that you're excited by that you'd like to share with us that we should check out as well.
So many. I know. I was gonna say, I'm like, who did I last see that I'm excited about?
I really love Jerome Ellis. His name, there's like 10 J's before the Rome part. He's a stutterer and a musician, a poet. His work is like really embodied. And I saw him come to New Music Circle like last winter, and I just felt so just in awe of his practice. So it's Jerome Ellis. Yeah.
There's just so many, and peers also that I have. I guess I'll say Fabiola Jean-Louis is an artist who is a friend of mine. She's a Haitian artist, but our works sometimes can be in conversation with each other and not on purpose. So I will say her name in her absence.
I can't think of any like contemporary or like any artist I've recently seen that I'm like, oh wow, I'm like so blown right at the moment. But I can name some like influences that that have impacted my work. Like I love the work of like Michael Rakowitz. I love the work of Mona Hatoum. I love the work of I even like Louise Bourgeois. Elias Sime. And then Ana Mendieta, Gordon Matta Clark. For reference.
Oh, okay. I have a question for Tawny Chapman. When you're, I may have missed this, but when you're working on your iconography series, did you draw any inspiration from the Orthodox churches and the iconography there within the Ethiopian or Coptic churches? Just curious.
Yes, and I'm glad you, so yes. I think for me, yes. So to just answer the question plainly, yes. I feel that I have just been inspired by when I see the large and beautiful mosaics. I always feel drawn to them. And I forgot to mention, and I'm glad we brought up iconography again, because the tiles that I'm using in those works are, they're actually paper. And I created them by cutting up tiny pieces of paper to create those tiles. They are works that I pushed to the side that I had, in my mind, destroyed. Because I work in photography, if I get paint on somewhere like their face or somewhere like that and I can't elevate it, even if I'm almost finished with it, I have to push it to the side and start over again. And so I had this big pile that I had to figure out what I was going to do something with. And really out of frustration, I just kind of started cutting the work, and then I started making them into tiles. But I just kind of used your question to say that so people know that those tiles are paper and not stone, but also to answer yes, I also was influenced by those works as well.
This is for all of you. I'm just curious how you all navigate such an AI-centric world, especially when it comes to art. Kind of a broad question, but I feel like, especially with art, AI it's just taken over, and I was curious how you guys choose to navigate that.
I don't engage with AI to the best of my abilities. Like, simply put, screw AI.
I guess I'll say that I'm not personally. So when you see an artwork that is created by AI, I can tell that it was created by AI. So it's not something that I am necessarily worried about in terms of that. So I don't really have that much of a, a worry that it's gonna take over, because I don't think that a machine could ever create something that we create as humans.
I feel the same way. I think we know it's AI, cool, cute, whatever. Like we're never going to, art is a human creation, and we've been creating art since the beginning of time, and we're never going to stop. And you could try, but we know it's there, and you can't make an AI sculpture right now. So it's okay.
I agree.
All right, this is going to be our last question. Hi, great job to all of you once again, and great job to Daniella for putting this together. This is fantastic. I have a question for all of you, including Daniella. A lot of you mentioned having research at the core of your practice, and I know Tawny, you mentioned a lot of great food anthropologists, and that's something that I personally am very excited about. So that's fantastic. Is there someone who comes to mind when you see something and you know that you need to know more about it? Is there a go-to person or a go-to resource that you're I don't know enough about this, but I want to know more. Where do I go?
I guess as the art historian, I can answer that first.
Thanks.
JSTOR is my go-to.
I was about to mention that.
I love a good article. So whenever I want to further kind of look, I also kind of like installation shots of seeing how art works and things, but JSTOR is my go-to, and I love a library. Let's utilize our libraries. I love going and exploring. They have so many resources. So that's kind of my first steps. An article or opening up a book, but yeah.
I will agree with JSTOR and also archive.org. If I type in the topic that I'm looking for, all of the books will come up. And so I also like physically owning the books also. So I will buy the books, but just to make it easier for myself, I will go to archive.org and kind of just type in watermelon or chitlins or any topic that I'm looking for, and all of those books from the past and even current books will come up, and I will just go buy them. Plus also download the book, but I also love owning the books in my in my library. So yeah.
I have like a tarot shelf where I have a bunch of cards that I collect. A lot of my research is like cultural research, so it's like doing stuff, going places, traveling, love books, library. I like the physical thing, and for me, a lot of it is just intuitive. Like I've got to go somewhere and I've got to feel it, and I feel like it will come to me that way. And I love JSTOR. But I also feel like it's an academic resource, so not everybody will have access to JSTOR. I don't think.
No,
Right, yeah.
not everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also say I love going into local bookstores. Sometimes you might find something you might like, and that might stimulate an idea, or maybe a form of knowledge that you had no idea that existed. Also, even going to art museum bookstores, there might be books that you never know that there's extensive knowledge, or even local, the smaller university museum stores, and they'll have all these niche books that you don't really see in mainstream libraries. But yeah, also the libraries are really everybody needs to have a library card.
All right, I think that was our last question. I just want to say thank you guys again for joining us, and thank you to these artists for agreeing to sit on this panel. It's been amazing, so thank you.